Dear Ambassador Staehelin, dear Mr. Assi, dear Michael, dear members of the jury, dear teams and dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to all of you and welcome to the Graduate Institute and to the Maison de la Paix. It's really my great pleasure to welcome you tonight here at the Graduate Institute for the 2022 Advancing Development Goals International Contest for Graduate Students, also known as the Geneva Challenge, a nickname, I would say, that says it all. The Graduate Institute launched the Geneva Challenge in 2014 with the generous support of Ambassador Jenö Staehelin and under the patronage of late Kofi Annan, whom the Graduate Institute is proud to count among its distinguished alumni. Kofi Annan presented the challenge in the following way. The Advancing Development Goals Contest is a worthy and important initiative and will encourage and inspire young students to be key agents for development and peace. For this 9th edition, students from around the world have been asked to develop innovative and concrete interdisciplinary proposals that address the global challenges of poverty reduction. We will have the chance to hear more tonight on the cross-cutting solutions that you are going to propose to us, dear participants. Even though I will unfortunately have to leave before the end of today's events, I'm very much looking forward to listening to the presentation of your projects and hearing the decision of the jury members as to which team will be the winning team this year. Let me take the opportunity to express a number of heartfelt thanks. First, naturally, I would like to thank Ambassador Staehelin for his long-standing support of the challenge. The challenge naturally would not exist without Ambassador Staehelin. These thanks are expressed on behalf, naturally, of all of us at the Institute, but also, I can say very easily, on behalf of all participants and alumni of the challenge since 2014. Let me also give warm thanks to Michael Moller, former director of the United Nations at Geneva and currently Senior Distinguished Fellow at the Graduate Institute. Michael accepted last year to replace Ambassador Staehelin as president of the jury. Dear Michael, it's really a great honor for all of us to have you in that role, and I cannot thank you enough. Naturally, our collective thanks extend also to our distinguished members of the jury who are sitting here in the front row, to members of the steering committee, and in particular to Martina Viarengo, who has been working very hard throughout the year on the challenge. So Martina is here, even though you cannot see her yet, but she has tested positive, which means that she's going to be with us online tonight. Last but not least, I cannot finish this round of thanks without singling out Lena Menge, whom you have all met, I'm sure by now, who is the manager of strategic partnerships and public relations at the Institute, and who is managing this contest since 5 years, and Cecilia Riederer, who is one of our students, but also the coordinator for this 2022 edition. Their role throughout the year is absolutely key to the success of this initiative. And let me also naturally thank, as I always do, the team, events teams and comm teams of the Institute for all the hard work in preparing for today's event. So thank you to all of you. The Geneva Challenge, in other words, represents an intense teamwork, and I'm impressed by the energy, the motivation, and even the joy that the challenge generates year after year. This year, as last year, we've managed to coordinate with the Kofi Annan Foundation to make sure that our Geneva Challenge finalists meet with the Kofi Annan changemakers, whom I welcome very warmly tonight. Many of them are here, sitting here in the room. Corinne has not been able to join us, but I'm sure that she's thinking very much about us tonight. And I'm very happy to see this institutionalization of our collaboration with the Kofi Annan Foundation on this particular 2 projects, but also on many other things. For this 9th edition, students have been asked to address one of our world's most pressing wicked challenge, poverty. Unfortunately, the optimism that was the rule 1 or 2 decades ago with respect to our capacity to move effectively and positively on the global challenge of poverty, SDG 1, is not so easy to sustain anymore. The COVID pandemic, but arguably also the rapidly progressing environmental threats, without forgetting the current war in Ukraine and its consequences for food supply, but also consequences on inflation have significantly reversed and will probably continue reversing the trend of the 1990s and early 2000s. Recent estimates from the World Bank show that only in 2020, an additional 97 million people fell back into extreme poverty. That is with the 1.90 measure and not the 2.15 measure, as you saw. As you know, this has been changed very recently by the World Bank. Recent projections by the World Bank, by Oxfam, and by other international organizations all unfortunately project that many millions more will join the ranks of extreme poverty this year and the following. And again, whether we measure extreme poverty with the 1.9 or 2.15 threshold, in both cases, we are going to see more increases in the coming years. Poverty is a wicked challenge for two main reasons. First, because it has multiple and complexly interconnected causalities. And recently, we're seeing very clearly how these multiple causalities reinforce each other through wicked dynamics. Environmental catastrophes, wars, pandemics, and the ways in which those pandemics have been handled in different parts of the world, economic crisis and inflation, but also new technologies and their laminating effect on certain jobs. The second reason why poverty is a wicked challenge is because of its systemic consequences. UNDP unveiled last month a very interesting and very welcome global multidimensional poverty index. The 2022 report that they just published underscores deprivation bundles, putting figures and facts onto the obvious that poverty should not only be measured through daily income, but that it is also about structural lack of access to health, to education, to job opportunities, that it is also about higher child mortality and lower life expectancy, but also about precarious or absence of housing with the security risk that this might imply, for example, but also with lack of energy and sanitation access, with lower nutrition qualities that will naturally reflect on life chances for children and hence for future adults. These are the complex issues that were at the heart of the Geneva Challenge this year. 279 teams representing more than 1,000 graduate students from across the world, from 64 nationalities registered for the challenge. In the 5 finalist teams, one from each continent, are here today with us. I think almost all of you are present. I think we only have one person online, which I say hello to, and we'll see a bit later. Before we launch into the presentation of the different projects and the award ceremony, we have a very happy moment. We have the great pleasure, the honor to welcome Mr. Elhadj Assi, who's chair of the board of the Kofi Annan Foundation and former Secretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. And Mr. Assi will give us a keynote speech where he will discuss the importance of equity as a mechanism for poverty reduction. Professor Martina Viarengo, again, who is online, will be moderating the lecture and discussing with Mr. Assi. So again, a big thank you to all of you who are making this challenge possible. A big thank you to all of you for having participated in the challenge and for being with us tonight. Really looking very much forward to listening to your projects, and enjoy the evening, enjoy the rest of your stay in Geneva, you and the change makers also, naturally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Sometimes when you really mean something and you want to talk about it deeply, they say you speak, from your belly, and that's maybe the reason why the microphones, are just, directly to my belly. So never take things, so literally. So I'm standing here knowing, that challenge, not to show height but respect. After that, I can then sit there to have a conversation, with you all. So first of all, thank you very much, Madam Sal, for the introduction. And I'm so happy to be among so many friends and colleagues here. The Ambassador Staehelin, so proud to walk into your footsteps and the footsteps of Kofi Annan. Dear Yvette, dear Michael, and Lena, most importantly, dear participants of the challenge, the Geneva challenge, and also the dear change makers, whom I have the opportunity and a privilege to have met yesterday and already learn a lot from them. Standing here to talk about, poverty and then how to get out of it with you all is certainly just a conversation, because the simple fact that we are here is a demonstration that we care. And then we care about poverty, we care about getting out of poverty. Because some of us may have lived it directly and experienced what it is. Many of us have dealt with it in the exercise of our profession. I see many friends here and colleagues who over the last 40 years have not done anything but just trying to respond to the challenge. And that is a journey. The journey continues, and it is so refreshing to see you, young people, confronting yourselves, with that challenge and coming up certainly with some innovative approaches that we may not have, thought about. Coming up also with the new means that we may not have had. And then most importantly, projecting yourselves, to not only be part of that community of carers, but to be leaders. Leaders of tomorrow, we often say when we talk about young people, but already leaders of today. Because the question now is poverty reduction, let's use that term for now, is not about what we'll be doing later on to achieve an outcome later. It is really what are we going to be doing today and now in order to have the future we want. What are we going to be doing now, each of us individually and collectively, to shape and then shape that future we want. Terms vary a lot. Some of us were confronted with poverty alleviation. Some of the more radical of us talk about poverty eradication. And we are learning to be more and more realistic and talking about poverty reduction. But beyond the terms, the bottom line is, what are we going to be doing individually, collectively, at the community, national, and institutional level to respond to the needs of people, to the challenges they are facing on a daily basis, either to recover or to restore or to keep what is most important to them, which is, by the way, what is most important to all of us, which is our human dignity. So that's the reason why when we talk about poverty, we use terms and then phrases that often only express the difficulty to translate the reality of the situation. So what terms are we using? What concepts are we using? People that can live with $1.5 a day, $1.90 a day, or then we revise it a little bit, in lower middle income countries, to $3.5 or $3.20 a day, or in upper middle income country to $5.20 a day. These numbers And these figures do not tell the story. They don't tell a story of a child, going to bed hungry. They don't tell a story of a proud father and mother, not being able, to attend to the needs, of their family. They don't tell a story of a proud mother, proud father, proud son and daughter who overnight, because of a shock or a hazard, can find herself or himself in a total situation of deprivation. And then you lose everything. When we say lose everything, we think about the material things, you lose. Your house, which is devastated, by the hurricane or the earthquake. Your material assets, that have been destroyed by the conflict, or the war. Not only do you lose that, but you even lose your identity. Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so become overnight a victim, become overnight a beneficiary, become overnight a displaced person, become overnight a refugee. Those names are no identity of anybody. These are situations. Situations where each of us could find himself or herself in if we have a misfortune. Either sometimes simply to be born and grow up in a certain place, because that same place can determine everything. For you, your status of health, your access to water, sanitation or not, your access to education, the opportunities you may have or not. For many, many, many children who are born in those places, it will even determine if they will reach their 5th birthday. So let's now try to see what is behind those stories and what is behind those numbers, to better grasp what this poverty is about, so that maybe we can reflect together on the means and ways through which we can find solutions to get people out of it. There are poor people everywhere on earth. Of course, the majority of them, depending on the definitions that we have, they live in the continent I'm coming from. And the numbers are staggering, talk about 40%. Often, in places where it is not because of lack of resources, it is not because of an environment, which is not fertile or conducive, but because of our own mistakes, of not doing the right thing, of not governing the right way, of not distributing the way it should be, of not exercising the values that make us human, simply, which is to share our humanity, and down from that, to share resources, to share knowledge, to share experience. And then build the social pact that we all need in order to have a society that is stable, where we can live together in harmony through partnership between the two halves that constitute our society, the men and women, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, and then those in the centers and those in the peripheries, or like we often say, those in the urban areas and in the rural areas. Those are the challenges we face. And if those are the real challenges, then poverty will be defined way beyond the macroeconomic aggregates, and the material resources, that are often expressed in monetary terms. We can talk about health poverty, because as I said, sometimes the same place, the simple place you're born, determine your status of health. We can talk about health poverty when we experience shocks and hazards we're not yet out of the hood, with the COVID pandemic, but we have seen an expression of inequity. We have seen, or even experienced sometimes, a kind of a disillusion in global solidarity, where those...
I'm not sure how to help with that.
That's all. That's exactly why we are here together, to try to find a way to help with it. So, when those who have, grab everything, and those who have not, will be always, last in line. But then we say, none of us is safe until we all are, which is very true. But how do we translate that, into the concrete actions that will be reducing the gaps, reducing the disparities, for our own sake, each of us, to make us all safe? So, COVID reminds us what health poverty is about. People talk about also the environmental poverty. The surroundings, in which you live, play a large role in people's well-being. Well, it's not the same, I think, to grow up, in the Sahel, where you have to try, to plant a grain and then pray for the water, and then let it grow in order to have, food for how many months in the year, where the resilience of people are being stretched and stretched and stretched, to the max. It is becoming now quite a actual subject matter to discuss when we talk about climate change, today. Adaptation we talk about. Well, we will adapt as humans, but the limits to adaptations, are just becoming so cruel, in front of us. So much more needs to be done. Some even talk about spiritual poverty, for lack of a better word, because the multiple deprivation that you face, will even determine, your level of faith. Faith expressed in different ways. Faith in yourself to start with, faith in your neighbor, in each other, in your community, which also can garner something that will be motivating us, to move us, to do something for us and for the others, which is hope. The state, of hopelessness and helplessness, which is then often, the most difficult situation that you find yourself in a state, of poverty. In some languages, of my continent, the same word, that define lack of power is the word that define poverty. Instead of saying, I'm poor, say, I have no power. Which means really what it really means, for people in the face, of those many challenges, that you face. Well, so then we can agree easily that poverty is much, much, much more as a lack of material resources. But it is correlated with all aspects of our lives. It is more likely, to be correlated, with a child malnutrition, simply put. How many children are stunted because, they are malnourished in their early years? And that causes, not only hunger, but causes, some neurocognitive damages, in their brain that will never reach their full potential. Most investments we'll be making in education will go astray because of that. And then we think that, well, let's train more teachers, let's do, some more curriculum development. but we have missed, one window of opportunity that we can no longer recuperate. That's poverty. It is also correlated with less access to services, as we know, education, in today's world, electricity, simply put, and even much simpler, clean water, sanitation, to come back, to that dignity, and also healthcare. And then if we are in those situations, then we become vulnerable in faces of many challenges, because there will be situations over which we have no control over, but the capacity to withstand those shocks, will be very limited. And that's the reason why the poor is always most affected by climate change. The poor is most affected by conflict. And then among the poor, you can even go down the line, further. And that is important when we talk about equity. Not even all poor are equal. Among the poor, the women, the children, the persons, with disability, the elderly, all of those that are kind of masked or being drowned, into the global averages, that we often see. So to understand poverty in order to reduce it and then get it in an equitable manner, we always need to get the data right and disaggregate it in a manner that we really know where the most vulnerable are, where the hardest to reach are. And then we start there. And that's really important, to start there. We talk about the last mile nowadays, we leave no one behind. But the last mile of problems should always be the first mile of response, if we are serious about equity and if we are serious about reducing poverty, through that angle. When we talk about equity, we sometimes also kind of equate it with equality. It's not the same. With equality, we give opportunity to each individual of group the same opportunities and the same resources. But we are not all operating from the same baseline. So equity will have them to recognize each person has different circumstances, and then we need to allocate the exact resources and opportunity needed to reach an equal outcome. So we have to work equitably even to get near to the equality of a baseline, so that then we can apply the global measures, to do so. But there are two important dimensions in that, which we will always have to keep in mind, that will almost, sum up everything we say. A poverty reduction that will not include justice, and a poverty reduction that will not include fairness, is damned to fail. Because we may even increase the material resources and assets of people from I don't know how many dollars a day that we want to talk about. But then the so-called, the bottom lines, upon which, we should build a stable society that can be also, again, the so-called for a peaceful society. All of that contributing, to a better human development, a better whole health, to bring us where we all belong to, which is our shared humanity, will not happen if we don't have fairness, if we don't have justice. And I think that is the reason why, while we all use, the same concept, we all use the same indicators, because we need some of them internationally, no doubt about it, to track some progress, to monitor. We have to do that. But let's not just satisfy ourselves with those. Let's just, push the envelope and then challenge, each other to look beyond them, not only to deepen our understanding, but to identify new ways and innovative ways, of getting to better results that may be more sustainable. I can't help but to think of Bhutan. You know, when at the time they were talking about the Gross National Happiness Index, I think some of us who were then at the UN at the time, you know, were seeing this kind of a sarcastic smile, you know, on the faces, you know, of many other, you know, member states. And there may be still some who are looking at it, you know, in a sarcastic way. But then beyond, you know, the appellation, let's just go deep into what they're trying to look at. And then they identified 9 domains, and I would like to invite you to go look back into that, and even beyond what they define for themselves, how can you explore those, you know, to put them in the different contexts, and then try to understand what it means. They talk about psychological well-being, health, education, time use, cultural diversity and resilience. Let's stop a moment, you know, there. A cultural diversity and resilience. We are diverse. Do we always see it? Do we always value it? Do we always recognize it? You know, do we use it as an opportunity, that something, you know, that makes us rich and more beautiful, or do we use it as something that divides us? All of that will be impacting on the social cohesion or lack thereof, and also to the risk of leaving many, many behind if we do not do the right thing. Good governance, community vitality, ecological diversity and resilience, the capacity to withstand the shocks. And then if we withstand the shocks, what are we keeping or leaving in our communities so that next time around when the same shocks come, we will not find ourselves in the same level of vulnerability? That we get out of what we've been calling in the pandemic response, out of this cycle of panic and neglect. We panic, we try to come with a big battalion, you know, of resources. When things subside, or we believe it is so, we forget until the next shocks, you know, come around. How do we sustain that and engage, you know, in the longer term? And then the 9th, so is the living standards, they say. Well, I could have taken Bhutan out. I could have taken, you know, the Gross National Happiness Index, and then talk about each of these domains, you know, to show something which is fundamental, which I think we can all agree on in this age, in the day and age of SDGs, which is poverty is multi-dimensional. There will be no unidimensional response to a multidimensional problem. Because poor people, they suffer multiple deprivations. We have to look at poor health. We have to look at lack of education. We have to look at insecurity, lower living standard. And these are not always concurrent with lack of money. It is more than that. Well, that is, if it is the starting point, you know, then we will have to leave no one behind and give it a meaning. We have to consider the last mile, but just the last mile to walk, but the first mile to walk to solve last mile problems. You know, we have to be very serious about inclusion and inclusiveness. And, you know, to end where I started, let me just, you know, quote, you know, in substance what is said in one of our languages, which is in the nudity of multiple deprivation, we cover ourselves with the last cloth. And that cloth is the cloth of dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Assi, for this very insightful and valuable talk. I'm sorry not to be among you today. As Professor Sal mentioned, I tested positive for COVID, but I'm glad to be able to join remotely. I would like to start by asking you, as you mentioned, the role of communities and also of multilateralism and global cooperation is going to be key to address the challenges of poverty reduction. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit the Sustainable Development Agenda hard, undermining social improvements of the past decades. Reversing some of these setbacks will require significant increases in public investment and implementation of structural reforms at a time when the impact of the pandemic on government debt and deficits has been large. How do you think this can be achieved? And what do you think can be done to lessen the impact of the pandemic?
Thank you very much. I happen to have been by chance a co-chair what we called then the Global Pandemic Preparedness Monitoring Board, together with Dr. Brundtland. That was before COVID. So we analyzed, data. We look at climate change. We looked at movements of population, global world. We look at, the emergence of new pathogens. And we produced a report which was called The World at Risk. The risk of a newly, very highly contagious respiratory pathogen, that could be compared, to the Spanish flu with devastating impact. Big lounge in the margin of the General Assembly. We shouted, we cried, we pleaded. The world was not listening. But there is something with us that, sometimes, even no matter how smart we are, we have a difficulty to grasp something that we have not yet experienced. 6 months later, we had COVID. When we had COVID, we told the world, you need to do things that could be applied to most of the challenges of our time. Early warning, early alert, early action, partnership, long-term commitment, resilience building across the board. We could apply that to climate change through mitigation and adaptation. We could use it, apply it to forecast-based financing by the use of meteorological data in some of these, disaster-prone areas. But we are not very good for preparing for something we have not, experienced. So then the answer will be partly, to go back, at the beginning. How do we prepare, alert early, warn early, and act early, and sustain, our action on the longer term? And we don't seem to be good at that either, as government, also in the international community. So a friend of mine was telling me that, governments sometimes, they behave like insomniacs, You try to sleep on one side, and then very quickly you change to the other side before you fall asleep, and then to the other side. And then the lack of capacity just, to sustain it, particularly, in times of hardship. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if we have a shock and a hazard of this kind, it reveals the best in us. It can reveal the worst in us. It reveals the best in terms of, solidarity. We're talking about poverty. Often, it is the poorest of the poor who share their resources, in hardship, taking care of the neighbor, caring for the child which is sick. Young people standing up and then protecting, the women and girls so that they're not being abused. Having worked in humanitarian settings, and I think I worked in some of those which we believe were the most rapid and fast in response. It doesn't matter how fast you are, you get into those communities, you find people helping already. How do we garner that? The third thing is then in partnership and global solidarity. And there we failed completely, as far as COVID is concerned. We were all competing, for the resources, grabbing everything that was, available. It becomes, more apparent, when we talk to the vaccines. But then, do you remember, we couldn't access, paracetamol, in many parts of the world. We just grabbed masks, were not even available. Hand sanitizers, could not be, available. And when we get now to the vaccines, like in situations of poverty, there were all those who come first in line and those who come last in line. And that's again where the equity issue, comes in. But we say, and it is true, in a pandemic, none of us is safe until we all are. And science has proven that if we have 40% of all people vaccinated in every country of the globe, is much better than have 90%, in one part and 10%, in the other. Now, we have places where we are in our fourth dose of vaccination, and then we have many places, in the world nowadays where less than 10% of the population has had access, to one dose, of vaccine. So, sharing in the spirit of partnership, it is not always an idealistic, a nice thing to do. It is the right thing to do, the right solution, to it. And I think, COVID has taught us, that, not has taught us, but we really exacerbated some of the dormant, dysfunctionalities that we had, and then identify some of those entry points, where we need to address them. Some steps are being made, some progress are being made. Good, is it enough? Definitely not. I think we need to be conscious of that, because if we manage that well, the lessons that we've learned could be for better health for all in general beyond COVID, but also could be applied to how equity could always be at the center of addressing some of the big challenges of a time, including poverty.
Thank you. And you also talk about inequalities in education and lack of education. The pandemic has really exacerbated the existing learning crisis. Around the world, more than 600 million youth have not mastered basic proficiency in mathematics and reading. And this will likely get worse. According to the estimates of the World Bank, 1.6 billion students around the world were affected by school closures due to the COVID pandemic. And the pandemic is affecting to a larger extent those who are already at greater disadvantage, including girls living in poverty. What can be done to avoid further declines in education attainment and learning outcomes in the global South?
First of all, among those millions and millions of children who did not go to school during the pandemic, we need to assess how many are returning at all. Because one of the big wastes is that not only millions of children in the global South in particular, and in situation of hardship, have missed schools, for months and for some of them over a year. But there's a huge proportion that will not have returned. I think that is, again, to go back to the last mile to start with, I think that's where. First of all, we have to make sure that they all return to school. all of them, that no one should be left behind. And then we have to look at schools and education also in a broader sense, that is bringing some of the values that we are talking about. Numeracy, very important. Literacy, extremely important. But I think now we're developing more and more the concept of education plus. How do we then learn when we are then particularly living in those very challenged situations, to learn to boost one's self-esteem in the spirit of dignity? But self-esteem without respect for others as a name, it's arrogance. That's what we don't want that. It's about self-esteem and respect for the other, learning to live in community, learning to partner and collaborate by sharing experiences, by sharing knowledge, by sharing learning materials, by working in groups, but also learning tolerance and fairness and acceptance in schools. Working in UNICEF, like many of my colleagues here, we just were so surprised and astonished that we invested in huge education programs where then we were very happy with our learning outcomes in terms of numeracy and literacy. But then those children coming from families affected by wars and conflict, who lost their parents, who've seen their loved ones being mistreated, abused, witnessed things that no child should have witnessed. And then living with many invisible wounds, and they're excellent readers and mathematicians. But then you ask them what they would like to do when they grow up. And then you hear an answer like, I want to go back and revenge, and then fight back, to recover the dignity of my family. So I think we have here an opportunity, again, like what we were doing when we tried to expand the base and then push the envelope, in terms of poverty reduction, education being so key in that. Also to equip, young people, with those assets and then values, for having the hope that we were talking about, having the feeling of self-worth, having the respect for others, having the tolerance, and then the openness, to work, in partnership, in communities. And I think that will be a fertile ground, even, for better outcomes, in terms of the modern learnings, that we want to see. And in many parts, and I think some of us could speak for ourselves, we have not made it to whatever we are talking about, or even be present here today, if there was not that opportunity for education, which is so key and then so important for everything we do. And I think keeping it as an entry point, schools to be kept, open, no matter what the shock is. But we make sometimes even a mistake, even if you have an earthquake somewhere and a flood, where do we put people? We bring them, in schools, as temporary shelter. Wrong. Where will the children go, if we do that? In conflicts, when you see a battalion coming in, they will go to schools and then put their tents and then their kitchen, whatever, do their dirty work. So schools have to be kept, safe and safe spaces. And last but not least, it is an entry point, to build social cohesion. Schools and health posts. Many a time, they're the only two places where people have left as something they have in common. Our children are going to the same schools. Some people, some women were telling me, we are very close relatives, we are very close family members. And I say, how related are you? They, our babies were born in the same health post. That was the meaning of it. And that is the reason why when sometimes people want to do havoc, they attack health facilities and they attack schools. And we think they're stupid anyway, but they know what they're doing. Because if you want to destroy the social fabric and then create, that instability. That's what they do. Now, we have to turn that around in a positive way and then see these are real assets that we need to preserve at any cost.
Thank you. Just a last question. One of the aims of our Geneva Challenge contest is to bridge the gap between academic research, practice, and policy making, and to give the opportunity to graduate students to contribute to the debate by proposing pragmatic solutions to advance development goals. What do you think are the right balances between research and public policy in the careers of those who care about development? And what advice would you give to our students, some of whom are about to start out their careers?
Research, data, science, these are more critical than ever before. They were critical anyway, but today they were competing with fake news. That will go much faster and then touches, people, on a chord which can mislead them, in a way that we have not even begun, to understand, the magnitude, of that. To have research, data, and science to inform policy is really critical. And that partnership, need to be built, between the academic world, the political world, and then the economical world, at the same time. So that's why we will have the kind of a sustainable development that we would like to see. Well, for young academics and researchers, the simple fact that you are where you are today is already a huge advantage. You all have your own journey. You made it to where you are, so congratulations. And I always say, and I truly mean it, these are causes that are very special. Working on development, working on poverty, working on peace, working, to preserve the climate. These are very, very special people. And I truly believe that special causes, they attract special people. So I think you're special for that. But then always be curious. Always be curious. Always challenge yourself. Always understand that it's not maybe a name, but it's a journey. That each step, is a door opened, for another level to move on. But allow yourself also to be humble and doubt. Doubt, to question yourselves, to question your certainties about issues. When you question your certainties, then you open yourself to learn, to critique, and then to improve. And that is the only way that we can progress, in society. So Camus said it very beautifully in one of the sentences when he was receiving, the Nobel Prize, in the famous speech of Stockholm. And he say, "Je suis un artiste presque jeune, riche de mes seuls doutes." They're only my doubts that make me rich, because these are the ones that opens me to new horizons, opens me to value, and often sometimes even to respect something I don't understand, at the beginning, in order to, explore new avenues. So I think research, can embark, people in that direction. But more than the activity of the research, it's the spirit of research. I think that will help, the younger generation, even the older. Very important, to continue on that path, because that was Kofi Annan was saying, never too young to lead, never too old to learn. So we're all on a learning journey in that regard. So maybe the young leaders should lead us, to the future, and we will follow and learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Assi. That was an insightful address. I know that you've inspired our students and all of us. And I look forward to meeting you in person on another occasion. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
We are now going to continue with the award ceremony of this contest, which will be chaired by Mr. Michael Muller, chair of our jury and a strong supporter of the Geneva Challenge. Mr. Muller is currently the chairman of the Diplomacy Forum of the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, senior distinguished fellow at the Graduate Institute, and member of the board of several foundations. He has over 40 years of experience as an international civil servant in the United Nations. He began his career in 1979 with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and worked for the United Nations in different roles in New York City, Mexico, Iran, Haiti, Cyprus, and Geneva. Mr. Muller served as Director General of the United Nations Office in Geneva, as well as Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Disarmament. Prior to that, he served as Executive Director of the Kofi Annan Foundation. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martina. That introduction was almost longer than my speech. Thank you. First of all, a very warm thank you to Elhadj Assi for his really insightful and impactful address and discussion, and to Professor Martina Verjango for moderating this. It's a privilege to have him with us on the occasion of the award ceremony of the 2022 Geneva Challenge. Dear Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear finalist teams. This year, we hosted the 9th edition of this wonderful contest, for which we called for proposals tackling the challenges of poverty reduction. This theme could obviously not have been timelier. Today, 700 million people around the world live in extreme poverty. In 2020, for the first time in decades, the global poverty rate increased from 8.4% in 2019 to 9.3% in 2020, pushing 71 million additional people into poverty. The COVID pandemic erased more than 4 years of progress. Rising inflation and other impacts of the Russian invasion of Ukraine has further slowed down global progress. As every year, the Geneva Challenge is a harbinger of hope, of ideas, and of solutions to tackle poverty, and shows us once again that youth leadership is crucial in this fight. The challenge yearly solicits theoretically grounded and pragmatic solutions to a real-world problem, from interdisciplinary collaborations between groups of master students. And as you're about to hear, the contributions presented here today and by all the participants of the Geneva Challenge speak to the enormous potential these young, innovative minds have. I would like to thank Ambassador Jenö Staehelin, the founder and funder of the challenge, for continuing to give the opportunity to all our young participants to embrace these challenges, see them as opportunities, and devise innovative solutions to effectively manage them and advance development goals. A special thanks to Marie-Laure Salle and the Geneva Graduate Institute for hosting this context here, and the Maison de la Paix, and for helping prepare the participants for their work and the cutting edge of global challenges. And this context, a special thanks to Lena, and to Cecilia, and to our jury for helping us get to where we are this evening. The Geneva Challenge 2022 received 86 submissions from 344 participants studying at 100 different universities around the world. And these numbers show how important the topic of poverty reduction is to young people everywhere, as it should be to all of us. The submissions have covered all regions of the world and present a wide range of creative and innovative solutions to tackle poverty in its many different forms. Importantly, the proposals have shown us that poverty is not exclusively an issue of the developing world, but that, in fact, it is found everywhere. And we were particularly pleased to see also proposals focusing on reducing poverty in highly industrialized countries and in European capitals, reminding us of the prevalence of this issue around the world. The jury has heard the excellent oral presentations from the 5 finalist teams for the 2022 edition this afternoon. Before we moving on to the award ceremony, though, we wanted to give them the opportunity to briefly present their projects to you. But before we do so, let me say that the overall quality of the oral presentations this year have been, as you will see, really excellent, and a clear improvement on the presentations of the past. This is in no small measure due to the fact, in my opinion, that the Geneva Graduate Institute has stepped up its technical assistance to the contestants, such as courses in presentations, in fundraising, and in project implementation. And we're looking into other areas in which we can help future contestants in improving their chances of success. So now let me start by asking the Team Africa from joining me on the stage and give us their brief presentation on their project. Prefer with that, or you want to stand here?
Yeah, I can do this. Thank you very much, sir. All protocols duly respected, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Roderick Jenö from Cameroon, and with me on stage, I have my lovely team, Akimbola from Nigeria, Chimwemwe from Zambia, Chidima from Nigeria, and Eric from Ghana. Our project is Jaka Agro Warehouse Integrated Solutions. As we all know, this year's theme of the Geneva Challenge is the challenges of poverty reduction. What challenge did we identify? Post-harvest losses is a huge challenge in the agricultural sector today. In Cameroon, over 40% of maize is lost annually after harvest. That means the farmers lose close to half of their production after the harvest stage. What is causing this problem? We looked at the northwest region of Cameroon, where most of the rural farmers are involved in maize cultivation, and we discovered that the problem is the storage method that these farmers use. The farmers in these rural areas use a poor traditional storage mechanism that leaves their maize vulnerable to attacks from pests and diseases, and this is what greatly contributes to the huge rates of their post-harvest losses. Now, how do we solve this problem? Jaka Agro Warehouse Integrated Solutions provide a warehouse for these rural farmers to store their maize in larger quantities and for longer periods, maintaining higher quality. Jaka Agro Warehouse also provides these farmers with access to finance by leveraging the warehouse receipt system. With this, the farmers obtain warehouse receipts from our warehouse, which they can use as collateral to obtain microloans from microfinance institutions that we are going to partner with. The Jaka Agro Warehouse also provides improved access to markets for these rural farmers. We are going to create a digital application which we are going to use to access rural, urban, and international markets in order to improve sales for these rural farmers. Finally, Jaka is also going to be providing capacity building for their farmers, especially on sustainable and climate-smart agriculture, on post-harvest handling, and all-year-round agriculture to ensure that the farmers increase their harvest. With this, we hope to achieve a targeted 50% reduction of the post-harvest maize losses of these farmers. And thus, that means we are going to reduce what they are losing, ensuring that the farmers have more to consume. That is increasing reducing their levels of food insecurity and increasing the output that the farmers have to sell, thus increasing their level of income. With this, we believe the farmers are going to gradually move out of poverty. So with this, we say with Jaka, the farmers have an assured route out of poverty. Thank you.
Very much, Team Africa. We'll see each other later. Can I call on Team Europe now, please?
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, dear jury members and Graduate Institute at large. We are Team Project Connect, and I have my lovely team here. My name is Amit, Agnes from Indonesia, Sohi from South Korea, and Saurabh from India. I'm also from India. There are 200 million people living with the disadvantages of poverty in India. At the same time, the government is making efforts in the form of welfare schemes. There are more than 700 welfare schemes to address this. But these schemes suffer from low enrollment rates, and some of the schemes have enrollment rates as low as 5%. The reasons are lack of awareness about the schemes and the availing procedure and time poverty. The benefits provided by these schemes, that is, if one is able to avail them, can go a long way in upward social mobility. Unfortunately, and as we discovered in our research, there exists a gap between the potential beneficiaries of the scheme and the government efforts. We propose a simple solution to bridge this gap. We believe that poverty is not the result of individual action, but collective inaction, which is why our project, our model, focuses on two interconnected parts. The first involves training and deploying high school students as part of their summer internship in their own community to spread awareness, information about a chosen set of high-impact welfare schemes and the application procedure. The second element involves partnering with NGOs who already have people on the ground and will provide advanced mediation and the necessary support to the beneficiaries in accessing the benefits of the schemes. We need two things. One, government support, which we already have to run our pilot project and develop a proof of concept May and June of next year. And two, the funding to implement this project. In our pilot, with an input of $60,000 US, we would be able to channelize a monetary benefit of 200 times of that amount. But the real benefit is not limited to the monetary benefits. It translates into access to health services, education, housing, employment, and most importantly, the upward social mobility, which will help in reducing poverty in a scalable and sustainable manner. Thank you. I would be happy to talk more about that.
Thank you very much, Team Europe. Thank you. You will not have escaped your notice that Team Europe doesn't look very European. Globalization in action. I now call on Team Asia, please, to come up.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Claudine. This is Aya, this is Andro, and this is Lei, and we're all from Team Asia, and we're proud Filipinos coming from Philippines. So we are Team Ipasada from Asia, proposing a mobile application to feature innovations to assist and support the jeepney drivers, the major public transportation in our country, the Philippines. When everything was halted during the COVID-19 pandemic, the public transport sector, specifically the locally made jeepneys, was among the heavily stricken groups during the COVID-19 crisis. Over 500,000 jeepney drivers across the country have lost their jobs due to drastic changes in mobility options, the pandemic, and the global economic crisis. This resulted in a disrupted source of income, with jeepney drivers arrested for asking for financial support from the government, and they were forced to beg for alms along the streets just to provide for their families and afford the basic commodities.
Our solution, Ipasada, is a multi-platform which aims to retrofit and future-proof the essential yet often neglected transportation sector. Through our app, we aim to first innovate, to integrate smart transportation features, not to replace jeepneys, but to innovate with them, to protect the iconic Filipino transport mode. Second, we want resilience. We want to build the capacity of drivers against adversity through training programs and services such as insurance and credit facilities. And finally, empowerment, to encourage drivers and their dependents to diversify and access alternative income generation schemes. Ultimately, our goal is to encourage collaborative efforts among all stakeholders to institutionalize ePasada. We want to reach more locations, reach more drivers, and reach every Filipino.
With ePasada, we want to work together to provide equity to the vulnerable jeepney drivers and bring them back their sense of dignity in their livelihood. Innovation, resilience, empowerment. This is ePasada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Team Asia. We now will listen to Team North America and Oceania.
Good evening, everyone. We're very grateful to be here. My name is Hilya, and these are my fellow teammates, Hannah and Rifki. We are all Indonesians, and we're proud to represent Columbia University and North America. Allow me to introduce our project with a heart-touching story. Meet Jaidi, a 40-year-old extremely poor waste picker who was born into a waste picker family, who now supports a whole family of 6, earning only $40 per month. Every day for 12 hours, JD picks waste through a random route in hopes to bring home $10, only to earn 0.5 cent. In Indonesia, there are at least another million people like JD. And worse yet, with their high mobility, they're even disconnected from empowering social security system, making extreme poverty for them a vicious intergenerational cycle. But what if we can change what was vicious to be virtuous? How will that impact families like JD? We believe we have two main problems here. First, the unorganized work of waste pickers are left unchallenged. They don't have fixed routes with guaranteed sellable waste to pick. And the second problem is the waste management issue within the society itself. The community is incapable of directing people like Jadi to high-quality segregation and recycling posts due to low awareness and provision. We offer you a solution with 3 approaches. First approach is by creating an organized transaction between the waste pickers and waste producers. Secondly, we will implement plastic credit system so that our efforts in reducing plastic waste could be generated into additional income. Thirdly, we're planning to conduct community education regarding waste segregation and educate the waste pickers about their citizen rights. Giving them education without exposing them to the idea of a better cash flow, it won't change anything for them. Because unlike you and me, they don't have the luxury to enjoy education for what it truly is. We believe that Sahaja will function as a systemic and intersectional, but modest and non-radical intervention with high visibility and direct impact. Thank you.
Don't forget your... Thank you, Team North America. And now we will listen to Team Latin America as our last group.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marcela. I'm very happy to be here together with Talita, Luisa, and Gabriela, who's joining us online. And I'm really proud to be representing Latin America and Brazil. Did you know that around half of the world's population has no access to safe water and sanitation? And did you know that people in poverty, women, and that groups already marginalized by society are the most affected ones? These people are being exposed to an unhealthy environment every day, and the negative impacts go beyond the health issues, affecting them financially and also contributing to the perpetuation of chronic poverty. Water wastewater is in its essence a project for providing sanitation to people living in favelas. But what if I tell you that we can use sanitation to do more? By using a combination of septic tank and constructed wetlands, water wastewater proposes to use sanitation as a tool for promoting environmental education, knowledge building and sharing, social organization, community empowerment, reduction of gender and racial inequality, and jobs creation. The simple technology of the system allows the participation and involvement of the community members in all stages of the project: planning, construction, operating, and maintenance. The project aims to prioritize women and non-Caucasian people, giving a chance to those historically left behind. By involving everyone and providing proper education and technical training, the community will be able to take care for the project's sustainability themselves. Let's not waste this opportunity to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for these excellent presentations. And we now come to the much awaited part of the evening. And please allow me to first invite the founder of the Geneva Challenge, Ambassador Staehelin, to the stage to come up to present the prizes to the winning teams. But before we hand out the prizes and tell you who has won, we'd like to invite up one by one some of our jury members to provide their feedback on the projects individually. So we'll start with Maria Luisa, who will talk about the team from North America and Oceania. No, one at a time.
Okay. So you want me to talk about the proposal?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the jury thought that this was an excellent proposal. This is Elhadj, sorry. This is Elhadj, North America.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I want to make sure I was not making a mistake. So the team was really thought that the proposal was extremely interesting and found many relevant issues in it, but I would like to highlight three of them. The first and foremost is the integrated and multidimensional way in which the team has proposed to address poverty, while at the same time reducing the waste, the dumping of waste. The objective of the proposal is clearly to empower some of the poorest of the poor, but you are using a multidimensional approach to it, as Dr. Assi was suggesting us to do. So addressing not only income poverty, but also addressing some health issues, and in particular, the mental illnesses issues that affect mostly the poorest of the poor. And we valued that. But in addition to that, you have added a dimension of environmental protection, because you have very creatively thought that one way of generating the necessary resources to carry out your intervention is by building on the gains, the environmental gains that collecting the waste and segregating the waste and selling the waste could give to these populations. So by doing that, building on the environmental gains, but also building on poverty reduction, I think your proposal shows how intertwined the Sustainable Development Goals agenda is. And it becomes an excellent example of that. So thank you for that. I think we also appreciated the very good theory of change that you developed and the respect of the roles of the different stakeholders. Elhadj is designed a very discrete intervention where you become a facilitator and a catalyzer that doesn't want to replace, that just want to support and enhance. And that also we thought has enormous value. And I think last but not least, by focusing on extreme poverty
in a middle-income country, I think you're showing to us and highlighting that current development models generate significant inequalities that require policy interventions, even in high-level middle-income countries or even in developed countries, as Michael was referring to. And that is also a very important reminder to all of us working on development cooperation and reducing poverty. So many thanks and all the best for the next steps.
Thank you very much, Maria Luisa. And now I call on Florian Schatz to give his opinion about the Team Asia effort.
Dear Team Asia, on behalf of the jury, it's my pleasure to congratulate you for your remarkable proposal and for being a winning proposal at this Geneva Challenge 2022. I would like to highlight now some of the reasons why we selected your project with the name iPasada. First, we thought that your proposal was very relevant, targeting poverty of an underlooked sector, such as public transportation. Second, we also really like that you analyzed poverty in all its dimensions, looking at the 5 Ps of sustainable development: planet, prosperity, people, partnership, and peace. Really adopting the idea of the Geneva Challenge and advancing development goals. Third, as your solution is based on an app, it's relatively easy to implement. By incorporating different services in your app, there's potential to empower jeepney drivers in a multitude of ways, and this without a major investment. You don't need to build infrastructure, hire people, etc. for that. One of the recommendations we have as a jury is to put more thought into identifying priority needs of the jeepney drivers, because you have so many great ideas that we think you need to prioritize on which ones to implement first. By selecting iPasada as a winning proposal for this year's edition, we want to celebrate your outstanding work and also motivate you, of course, to implement the project, because we believe it has the potential to change the life of thousands. All the best for your proposal and for implementing it, and congratulations.
Thank you, Florian. Yvette Stevens, would you like to come up and tell us about Team Latin America's effort?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, let me start by saying that the jury liked this project because it touched on an aspect that is usually neglected. I mean, even when we speak about Sustainable Development Goal 6, it's water and sanitation. Most of the focus is on water. And sanitation is usually not given the attention it deserves. And I think this project, in addressing sanitation, already addresses something which is neglected, but which is important. As the team showed, that this is extremely important, not only in terms of providing sanitation, in terms of health, in terms of employment, in terms of poverty reduction, and they came out very clearly with what they meant and how this project is going to affect all these elements, and is also going to bring together community adhesion to, cohesion to. We all know how in urbanization in our developing countries, most of our developing countries, there is no centralized sanitation system because of the fast growth of urbanization, and we know that the favelas are what we would call also the ghettos within the urban, surrounding the urban communities, where they do not have access to a centralized sanitation system, but nevertheless they are working to address sanitation. And I think this project brings together the technical expertise of the presenters to see how to solve that problem in terms of the rural area, and not only to solve the problem of having a healthy system, but also how this could be used to affect environmental issues. So use this project also to look at how the waste is used to affect and also benefits the population. And environmental issues are very important because, as you probably know, one of the recent breakthroughs in the Human Rights Council is the right to a clean environment. And I think Brazil participated and also voted in favor of that resolution. And we will be holding Brazil responsible to address this. So we can see that the support from the government could be forthcoming to say that this project is addressing the environmental issues, is addressing the access to a clean environment in these favelas. And we want to thank you very much. We want to thank you because also you're engineers. And aside, I'm also an engineer. So we want to thank you very much for drawing attention to the importance of sanitation, and we like the project very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Florian, you're up again to talk about Team Europe's effort.
Actually, Michael is confusing us by changing the order a little bit, but it's my turn now.
Keeping you on your toes.
Exactly. Dear Team LSE, I'll call you Team LSE because, as Michael mentioned before, you don't look very European. 11 years ago, I graduated myself from LSE, so it's a particular pleasure for me to congratulate you today for your proposal and to help you receive your prize. Your project with the title Project Connect has convinced us as a jury for the following reasons. You didn't try to reinvent the wheel. Actually, you took advantage of the most powerful tool in poverty reduction in history, the welfare state. As you point out, the government of India has over 700 welfare programs, which is very impressive, but only about 27%, I think, you said, of the eligible vulnerable population is participating as enrolled in these programs. Why? What are the barriers to this? That's actually the question that you ask in your proposal. And then you go on in your proposal to analyze this really in depth. You're looking at primary data, secondary data, quantitative data, qualitative data, and you think it through much more than a lot of the examples we've seen before. And you come up with a solution which is really based on this thorough analysis. We particularly like that the idea connects all key stakeholders, from high school students to NGOs to government authorities, and you align their incentives and interests for the common good. Therefore, we are very happy to select you for the prize of this year's Geneva Challenge. And again, we hope that you will use this prize to make the idea a reality. Because after all, your project gets to the root of poverty reduction from my point of view, and it has the potential to reach millions. Congratulations again, and all the best.
Thank you, Florian. And then the final team, Maria Luisa Silva, will speak about Team Africa's submission.
So my most sincere congratulations to JACA team for your excellent proposal. I think you are rightly recognized indeed in this event. And I think there were three issues that I would like to particularly highlight. The first is the relevance of the proposal. You did not shy away from focusing on the problems faced by the most severely affected by extreme poverty in the world, the food insecure rural populations, and by applying a solution that would enhance their livelihoods and their agency. And by doing that, the project will have a sustainable impact on the two key SDGs for poverty reduction. SDG 1 on eliminating poverty, and SDG 2 on zero hunger. The second dimensions I would like to highlight is your methodical focus on a practical solution, actually a very good one, because only when we translate concepts into practice, we are able to have an impact. So you first started with addressing a very concrete and relevant problem. Then you focused on a workable and sustainable technical solution coupled with capacity building. And then you developed a proposal in a very well-defined area, one which was severely food insecure, extremely poor, vulnerable to climate change, and affected by conflict. So we really thank you as a jury for bringing us to how truly making change in reality. And lastly, I think we very much appreciated your motivation and your ambition for scalability. I think we have in you a Pan-African team wishing to put your energy and skills to reduce poverty in your own continent. And that in itself has a great value, and I think it's really at the core of the heart of the Geneva Challenge. So I wish you all the best, and I strongly encourage you to go ahead. Thank you.
So, the jury, as you can imagine, deliberated intensely and finally came up with a somewhat different result than we have had in the past. And it is my great pleasure to start first with the third prize, of which we have two. And the third places go to a team from North America and Oceania, the Sahaja project, and the team from Asia, IPASADA. So, please come up. Please join us on the stage, both teams. It's going to be a little crowded, but it's fine. So the first team is from Asia.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Who is going to get it?
All of us. And the team from North America. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. We have one second place, which goes to the team from Latin America, water, waste, water. Thank you. Yeah, yes. Yeah, okay. Forget picture taking. And this year, finally, we have two first places. The team from Europe, Project Connect, and the team from Africa, Dhaka. Thank you, everyone, and congrats. Ah, yes.
I want to be on a photo.
My warmest congratulations to all the winners. We all hope that you will continue your wonderful work in advancing the development goals. So this brings us almost to the end of our ceremony. And I just have one last announcement to make before we close. I have the pleasure to announce that the 2023 edition of the Geneva Challenge will address the challenges of loneliness. Loneliness has proven negative effects on people's mental and physical health, overall well-being, and ability to fully participate in the political, social, and economic life of their societies, and therefore affects their material well-being and prosperity. Loneliness, while prevalent everywhere, is especially present in vulnerable and marginalized communities and in situations that impact people's lives much more fundamentally, such as forced displacements, migration, war, and economic, climate, and health shocks. Today, loneliness is a highly critical and complex issue everywhere, and we therefore invite graduate students from around the world to develop and present innovative and interdisciplinary solutions that address this global challenge of loneliness. Please spread the word around you on the topic of our next challenge edition and encourage your colleagues to participate in this next year's challenge. Well, with this, I thank you all for joining us tonight and for joining this challenge, and wish you all the very best. Thank you.